The great hall of the alien palace was filled with lights, music, and guests from across the empire. Silver banners hung from the ceiling, shimmering in the glow of floating orbs. The finest warriors, merchants, and nobles stood around long tables, their voices low, their eyes sharp. Every alien in the hall was waiting for one thing: the appearance of the Empress and her daughter. The Empress entered first. Tall, proud, her crown catching the light, she walked with the authority of a ruler who had crushed rebellions and commanded starfleets. Behind her floated a hover chair, carrying the young princess. The girl was small, fragile compared to the other children of her kind. Her legs did not move, and her arms rested weakly on the chair. Her large violet eyes searched the hall, but found no welcome. Wherever she looked, nobles turned their heads away or whispered into their cups. Some tried to smile politely, but everyone knew the truth. The princess was broken. The musicians began to play. A strange melody, soft and haunting, filled the hall. Alien couples moved to the center, their movements sharp and graceful, their long cloaks twirling with each step. The court watched in admiration, but the Empress's daughter remained still, locked in her chair, unable to join. The girl lowered her eyes. She had never danced. She had never been asked. For a moment, silence spread through her heart. Then the whispers began. She cannot even stand. What future ruler cannot dance? Her weakness is a shame. The Empress heard every word, but her face did not move. She sat on her throne, her eyes hard as steel, but deep inside, a storm raged. She loved her daughter, yet she could not give her what the child wanted most, to be like the others. And then it happened. From the edge of the hall, a human stepped forward. He wore the simple black uniform of a servant. His job was to carry trays of food and pour drinks for the alien nobles. But now, without permission, he set the tray aside and walked toward the princess. The hall fell silent. A human? A mere waiter? He bowed before the hover chair, his hand over his chest. His eyes met the princess's. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then he extended his hand to her. The nobles gasped. Some laughed in shock. Others muttered in anger. A servant was daring to touch royalty? The Empress narrowed her eyes. No one in the hall moved. They all waited for her command to strike him down, or to let him continue. The girl looked at the human's hand. Her small fingers trembled. Slowly, almost afraid, she placed her hand in his. The music still played. The human smiled gently, then placed his other hand on the edge of her hover chair. He began to guide it, moving with the rhythm of the song. Step by step, the chair slid across the polished floor. Gasps filled the air. The princess's chair swayed in time with the music. The human bent low, moving as if he were her partner, matching every note with a soft gesture. The girl's fingers clutched his hand. At first, her eyes were wide with fear. But then, a small sound escaped her lips. A laugh. It was weak, soft. But it was real. For the first time in years, the princess smiled. The Empress's chest tightened. She leaned forward, unable to look away. Her daughter's face was glowing, alive in a way the Empress had almost forgotten. The human had done what no healer, no noble, no prayer could do. He had made her daughter happy, but the court was outraged. "This is an insult," one alien noble shouted. "Unforgivable." Another hissed, "A human touches the bloodline. Punish him." The Empress did not answer. Her eyes never left the dance. The human moved with patience, his steps slow and respectful, as though the princess were the most important partner he had ever held. Around them, the other dancers stopped. The music seemed to belong only to them. Naudap and nobles waited for the Empress to end this disgrace. But still, she did not speak. The girl's hover chair spun gently, carried by the rhythm. Her hands lifted in the air, following the human's lead. For a moment, she looked free. Not broken, not trapped, but alive. The Empress's fingers tightened on the armrest of her throne. Something deep within her stirred, a memory of her own childhood, of dancing before her people, strong and proud. That had been taken from her daughter, and now, a simple human had returned it, even if only for a moment. The music reached its end. The human bowed low before the princess once more, lowering her hand gently. The hall was silent, waiting for judgment. Would the Empress order his death for touching royalty? Would she crush this insolence? Or would she admit, even to herself, that the human had awakened something she could not ignore? Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she sat frozen, her eyes locked on the human, her daughter, and the space between them where something dangerous and powerful had just been born. The Empress's life would never be the same. Asterisk. The Kumbu hall was still, yet the Empress felt every heartbeat echo inside her chest. The music had stopped, but the memory of her daughter's laughter lingered in the air like a forbidden secret. Every noble eye turned toward the throne. The guests waited for her judgment. Should the human be executed for daring to touch royal blood, or rewarded for doing what no alien ever could? But the Empress said nothing. Her silence was louder than any command. It burned through the nobles, through her advisors, and even through the human himself, who stood bowing with his head lowered, waiting for punishment. The princess's smile, however, did not fade. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, trembling from the aftertaste of joy. She looked at her mother, her Empress, not with fear, but with hope. The Empress's gaze locked with her daughter's, and for the first time in years, she saw light in those violet eyes. That single moment struck her harder than any blade. But then came the voices. This cannot be allowed. He insulted the bloodline. Kill the human, before others think they are equal to us. The noble's words swirled around her, venomous and sharp. One of her most trusted advisors stepped forward, bowing deeply. "Great Empress," he said in a low voice, "if you allow this weakness, your enemies will use it against you. The human must be punished." The Empress's eyes narrowed. Weakness? Was it weakness to see her daughter smile? Or was it strength to let her live? She did not answer. Instead, she raised one finger. The guards froze. The human's life hung on the edge of that single gesture, but the Empress lowered her hand. "Leave." "US," she said, her voice calm but cutting like glass. The nobles exchanged looks of outrage and confusion, but none dared to disobey. One by one, they bowed and withdrew from the hall. The music stopped completely. Only the human, the princess, and the Empress remained. The silence was heavy. The Empress rose from her throne and descended the steps. Her cloak dragged against the polished floor. She stopped just before the human. Her eyes studied him like a weapon ready to strike. "You," she said quietly. The human bowed deeper. "Yes, Empress. Do you know what you have done?" His voice did not shake. "I gave your daughter a dance." Her eyes burned with questions. Was it arrogance? Was it ignorance? Or something else? The Empress stepped closer. She could see the sweat on his brow, the way his hands trembled, though he tried to hide it. And yet, he did not break eye contact. Most aliens would have begged. He did not. Her daughter's voice broke the tension. "Mother." The girl's voice was soft, fragile, but filled with emotion. "Please, don't hurt him." The Empress turned her gaze on her daughter. Her heart tightened again. She had not heard that tone from the child in years. The girl's eyes were wet. "He made me feel alive." The Empress stood in silence. Her people would call this a disgrace. They would call her weak. But as she looked at her daughter, she wondered if they truly understood strength at all. She straightened, her cold mask returning, though inside she was unsettled. "Rise," she ordered the human. He obeyed. Standing tall, though his life still hung by a thread. "You will come to my chambers tomorrow at dawn," she said. Alone, The human blinked, startled, but quickly bowed again. "As you command, Empress." The princess let out a small breath of relief, her hands trembling with joy. But deep within the Empress's heart, a war had begun. That night, when the palace halls grew quiet and the torches dimmed, the Empress sat alone in her chamber. Her mind refused to rest. She saw again her daughter's smile, heard the human's steady words, and felt the dangerous warmth creeping into her heart. For years, she had ruled with iron. She had crushed traitors, silenced dissent, and buried any sign of weakness. Yet, here she was, shaken not by armies, not by war, but by a human servant who dared to dance. She closed her eyes, but in the darkness, the memory replayed again and again. Was it possible that humans carried something her people had lost? Something beyond power and tradition? She clenched her hands. If she allowed herself to believe it, everything she built could crumble. But if she ignored it, she might lose her daughter's light forever. The Empress whispered to herself, her voice low and dangerous. This human will either save us or destroy us. And with that thought, she waited for the dawn. The palace did not sleep. Even as the stars shimmered outside the great windows, voices stirred in the hidden corners. Nobles gathered in secret chambers, their faces twisted with fear and anger. The memory of the human touching the princess had spread like wildfire. What had been a dance to some was an insult to others. In the dim light of a private hall, a group of alien lords whispered together. Their robes shimmered with gold, their eyes sharp like blades. "The Empress has gone mad," one hissed. "She let a servant, a human, touch royal blood," another spat. "If she continues, she will destroy the respect of the throne." But one voice spoke colder than the rest. "Do you not see? This is our chance. If the Empress grows weak, we can take her place." The words fell like poison into the room. The nobles nodded slowly. Rebellion was not spoken openly, yet the seed was planted. Meanwhile, in her chamber, the Empress sat alone by the window, her crown removed, her dark hair falling loose. She had not told anyone, but she could still hear her daughter's laugh echoing in her ears. A single moment, and yet it haunted her. Her daughter slept peacefully now, dreaming of dances. But the Empress could not. Her mind replayed the human's boldness, his calm eyes, his steady voice, his defiance wrapped in gentleness. She clenched her fists. Why had she not punished him? Why had she summoned him for dawn instead? Her pride told her it was dangerous. Her heart whispered it was necessary. And so, for the first time in many years, the Empress doubted herself. But outside, the whispers grew louder. In the training yards, guards muttered as they polished their spears. "Insolence," one growled. "If I had my way, that human would already be dead." "Careful," another warned. "The Empress protects him now, but for how long?" The human himself knew nothing of these whispers. After the banquet, he returned to the servants' quarters. Other humans stared at him, their faces pale with fear. "You touched her?" one gasped. "You'll be killed," another whispered. But he only shook his head. She smiled. Those two words silenced them. They did not understand, but he had seen something that no one could erase, the fragile light in the princess's eyes. Still, as he lay down to rest, he wondered, what price will I pay for this? At dawn, the Empress summoned him. The chamber was vast and silent, lit only by soft flames burning in crystal holders. She sat on a raised seat, her expression unreadable. Guards lined the walls, their eyes cold. The human stepped forward, his footsteps echoing. He bowed low. "You commanded me, Empress," he said. Her gaze cut into him like a blade. For a long time she said nothing. The silence was heavy, and the guards shifted uneasily. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you dare? You know touching her means death." He lifted his head slightly. "Because she deserved to dance." The Empress's breath caught. His answer was too simple, too fearless. He spoke not like a servant, but like someone who believed he had the right to stand before her. "You risked your life for nothing," she said coldly. "No," he replied softly. "Not for nothing," for her smile. The Empress's fingers trembled on the armrest. None of her people would ever speak so plainly to her. None would risk death for kindness. And yet this human did not flinch. The guards shifted again, some glaring at him with hatred. The Empress leaned forward, her voice dropped. "Do you not fear me?" "I do," he said honestly. "But I fear a world where she never laughs more." Her eyes widened, just slightly. And in that moment, she understood why the nobles whispered. This human was not simply dangerous because he touched her daughter. He was dangerous because he spoke truths her own people would never dare. Outside the chamber, the whispers of rebellion grew into plans. In the shadow of the palace towers, the same alien lords gathered again. "The Empress is weak," one declared. "She listens to a human's words," another growled. "If this continues, the Empire will collapse." Their leader leaned closer, his eyes burning. "Then we must act. The Empress's bloodline is corrupted. It is time we prepare for her fall." And so, while the Empress struggled with her heart, and the human prepared for whatever fate awaited him, a storm began to form in the dark corners of the Empire. The first whispers of rebellion had become a dangerous wind. That night, the Empress stood on her balcony, watching the stars. Her heart was torn between crown and child, between power and love. She whispered to herself, almost in fear, "One dance has broken the silence of an empire." And far below, unseen in the shadows, the rebels whispered their reply, "Then one knife will silence the human." The human stood in the center of the Empress's private chamber. The room was unlike any other in the palace, its walls carved with ancient symbols, the air heavy with incense, and a long window opening toward the endless stars. The silence was thick, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. The Empress sat on a throne-like seat, her crown resting nearby, her sharp eyes fixed on him. She had dismissed the guards. No one else was allowed to witness this meeting. He bowed deeply. "You summoned me, Empress." Her voice was calm, but her tone carried iron. "Yes, and now you will explain." The human raised his head, not arrogant, not afraid, simply steady. That steadiness unsettled her more than defiance would have. "Why did you dance with her?" she asked. Her voice echoed through the chamber. "Do you seek favor? Do you wish to rise above your station?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Empress. I only wished for her to feel joy." Her eyes narrowed. "Joy, yes," he said softly. "Your daughter has been surrounded by silence for too long. Dance is not just movement, it is a way to feel alive, even when the body cannot follow. I wanted her to remember what living feels like." The Empress stared at him, her expression unreadable. His words were simple, but they struck deep. A way to feel alive. No alien healer, no counselor, no warrior had ever spoken like this. She leaned forward. "How does a human know such things? Your kind are not scholars of the mind. You are soldiers, laborers, servants." The human smiled faintly. "Because we humans are fragile, Empress. We bleed easily, we break often. And when you are fragile, you learn quickly that strength is not only in the body, it is in the spirit." The words sank into her like a blade sliding past armor. For years, she had been taught that weakness must be hidden, that strength was only power and control. Yet here was a servant saying the opposite, and somehow she could not ignore it. Rose from her seat and began to walk slowly around him. Her cloak whispered against the floor. "You speak boldly for one who could be killed with a single command." She murmured. He bowed his head again. "Perhaps, but truth deserves boldness." Her lips tightened. No one in her empire spoke to her this way. Not even her generals, not even her council. But this human, he did not tremble. Do you not value your life?" She asked. "I do," he answered quietly. "But if living means silence while others suffer, then what is life worth?" The Empress stopped behind him. She studied the lines of his back, the way he stood tall despite knowing death might come any second. Her people would call it foolishness. Yet something in her heart whispered it was courage. Her daughter's face flashed in her mind. The smile, the laughter, the trembling hope. The Empress's hand clenched by her side. She hated the war inside her. Finally, she moved to stand before him again. "Human," she said, her voice lower now, "you will tell me everything about your people, about why you believe such weakness holds power. You will not lie to me. Do you understand?" "Yes, Empress," he said firmly, her eyes locked onto his. For a moment, the chamber seemed smaller, the stars outside closer, the silence unbearable. She could feel her heart beating too fast as she looked away quickly, hiding the strange warmth in her chest. That night, she kept him longer than she intended. He spoke of human dances, of how even in war or hunger, his people would find music and movement to remind themselves they were more than their pain. He told her of mothers who sang to children when food was scarce, of soldiers who marched in rhythm to keep courage alive, of lovers who danced under broken skies just to remember hope. The Empress listened, silent, though her mind swirled. Each word was like fire against the cold stone of her heart. When he finally bowed again, ready to leave, she raised a hand to stop him. "One more thing," she said softly. He froze. "Yes, Empress?" Her eyes searched his face. She wanted to ask something she could not admit to anyone else. "Show me," she whispered. His brow furrowed. "Show you. Dance with me." The words left her lips before she could take them back. The human hesitated, his eyes widening. The Empress of an empire, ruler of millions, had just asked a servant to dance, but when he saw the faint flicker in her eyes, half challenge, half longing, he nodded. "As you wish." He stepped forward, careful, respectful. His hand hovered, then touched hers lightly. Her skin prickled at the contact, though she hid it beneath a mask of steel. Together, they moved slowly across the chamber, no music, only the faint hum of the city and the stars watching in silence. The Empress felt her body stiff at first, unused to being guided. Yet his steps were patient, gentle, sure. And in that quiet dance, something stirred inside her, a memory of youth, of freedom, of a self she had buried beneath the crown. For one stolen moment, she was not Empress. She was simply a woman, moving to a rhythm only their hearts could hear. When the dance ended, she pulled her hand back sharply, regaining her cold mask. "You will not speak of this," she ordered. Her voice was steady, but inside, her heart raced. The human bowed. "As you command." But as he turned to leave, the Empress remained still, her mind in chaos. What had she just done? Why had she allowed herself such weakness? She looked at her hand, the same hand that had touched his, and whispered to herself, her voice trembling in a way she despised, "This human, he is dangerous." The next banquet was meant to display strength. The Empress had ordered it herself, an evening of music, feasting, and flawless ceremony. She wanted her nobles to see order restored, to silence the rumors that spread like cracks through her empire. The hall was even more magnificent than before. Golden banners hung from the ceiling, jeweled lamps glowed against the walls, and the finest dancers of the empire waited to perform. Yet beneath the glitter, unease lingered like smoke. The nobles watched closely, whispering as the Empress entered with her daughter. Their eyes flicked again and again to the corner where the human stood with the other servants. No one had forgotten the night of the dance. The musicians began. A sharp, powerful rhythm echoed through the chamber. Alien couples moved gracefully into the center. Their steps were perfect, their timing flawless, but the Empress barely watched. Her eyes were drawn against her will to the human. He did not meet her gaze. He stood quietly, pouring wine for a noble, as if nothing in the world concerned him. Yet the memory of their secret dance burned in her like fire. Her daughter sat in her hover chair, watching the floor. The faint smile she had worn since that night still lingered, but her eyes turned, just once, toward the human, the Empress noticed. Her heart tightened. The whispers of rebellion had reached her ears by now. She knew her lords plotted, that some even dared to speak of removing her. Yet what unsettled her most was not them. It was the thought of a human's hand in hers, the forbidden warmth she still could not forget. And then, in a moment that shook the hall, the Empress rose from her throne. The dancers froze mid-step. The nobles fell silent. Slowly, deliberately, she descended the steps. Her crown glimmered, her cloak trailing behind her like a river of night. She walked past the other dancers, past her generals, past her advisors. She walked straight toward the human. A gasp rolled through the hall. He stiffened, bowing low. "Empress." Her voice was calm, but every word thundered like war. "Dance with me." The hall exploded in outrage. Nobles shouted, some in disbelief, some in fury. "Impossible. A disgrace. She cannot." But the Empress raised her hand. The hall went silent at once. None dared to disobey. The human hesitated. His eyes searched hers. There was no jest in her face, no softness, only command. Yet beneath it, he saw something no one else could. The same dangerous warmth that had flickered in her chambers. He bowed again. "As you command," the musicians faltered, unsure, but one glance from the Empress and they began anew. A slower melody this time, deep and haunting, filling every corner of the hall. The human stepped forward. He reached for her hand. The court gasped again as his fingers brushed the Empress's. She felt the touch like fire against her skin. Every instinct told her to pull away. But she did not. Together, they moved into the open space. At first, the Empress's steps were rigid, her movements sharp and controlled. She was used to commanding armies, not following rhythm. But the human's hand steadied her, guiding her with patience. His voice was low, just for her. "Don't command the dance. Feel it." Her lips pressed tight, her eyes flashing. No one had ever spoken to her like that, yet she obeyed. Slowly her body eased, her steps softened. The music wrapped around her, and for a moment, she forgot the watching eyes. The nobles looked on in horror. Their Empress dancing with a human. Their ruler lowering herself before the court. Some whispered it was weakness. Others whispered it was madness. But none could deny what they saw. The Empress was alive in a way they had never witnessed before. And her daughter, watching from the hover chair, clapped her small hands together with joy. When the dance ended, the human released her hand with respect, bowing low. The Empress stood tall, her face cold once more, though inside her chest her heart pounded wildly. The hall was dead silent. Then, a noble stepped forward, trembling with rage. "Empress," he cried, "this is shame. You dishonor your crown, your people, and your throne. End this foolishness before the empire falls apart." The Empress turned her head slowly, her eyes colder than ice. "Silence," she commanded. Her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. The noble dropped to his knees, choking on fear. The Empress looked over the hall, her gaze sweeping across every noble, every general, every whisperer of rebellion. "You call this shame?" she asked, her voice ringing across the room. "Then perhaps you have forgotten what true strength is." She paused. The weight of her words pressed on them all. Strength is not in silence. It is not in cruelty. It is in life, in joy, and tonight my daughter smiled. Her words shocked the court into silence. None dared to reply. The Empress turned, her cloak swirling behind her, and walked back to her throne. She sat tall, her face unreadable, but as the human bowed once more and stepped back among the servants, she allowed herself the smallest secret thought, the forbidden touch. has already changed me. The palace walls could not hide the storm anymore. What began as whispers now spread like fire through the empire. In the markets, merchants spoke of it in hushed voices. In the barracks, soldiers sharpened blades while muttering curses. Even in the noble courts of distant worlds, the news spread. The Empress had danced with a human. Some called it love. Others called it weakness. But all agreed it was dangerous. Inside the palace, life had changed. The princess laughed more now. She asked for music in her chamber and clapped her hands when the human entered. Her hover chair moved in gentle rhythm, guided by him, and each time she smiled, the Empress's chest ached in ways she could not name. But with joy came risk. Guards watched the human with hard eyes. Nobles avoided speaking his name. And behind closed doors, lords sharpened their knives. The Empress knew it. She could feel rebellion gathering like thunder. Yet, instead of sending the human away, she kept him closer. One evening, she summoned him not to her throne room, but to her private gardens. The air was cool, filled with the scent of alien flowers glowing faintly in the night. The Empress stood among them, her cloak trailing behind her, the starlight catching her crown. He approached carefully, bowing low. "Empress." She turned to him, her eyes softer than the last time. "You are aware they will kill you if they can." He lifted his head. "Yes. You do not fear this?" He smiled faintly. "Fear does not matter if the purpose is greater." Her lips tightened. "And what is your purpose?" He stepped closer, his voice steady. "To see her smile again. To remind her she is not broken. To remind you that even rulers deserve to feel alive." The Empress's breath caught. For a moment, her mask cracked. "You dare," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fury and something far more dangerous. "Always," he replied softly. Their eyes locked. For one heartbeat, it felt as if the palace itself held its breath. The Empress wanted to turn away, to crush the feeling rising inside her, yet she could not. The bond between them had already formed, silent and unbreakable. But bonds draw enemies. That same night, deep in the shadows of the palace, a group of nobles gathered in secret. Their leader, a broad alien with eyes like burning coals, slammed his hand against the table. "She dishonors the throne." He spat. "She dances with a human like a common girl." The others nodded. The people whisper of weakness. The soldiers question her. "Soon she will lose all respect." "Then we must act," the leader growled. "If the Empress falls, the Empire must not fall with her. Remove the human. Remove the infection." A chilling silence followed. Then, slowly, heads bowed in agreement. Back in her chambers, the Empress sat awake long into the night. She told herself it was foolishness, that she was strong enough to cast him aside, to crush any feelings before they took root. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter laughing, saw his steady hand guiding her own across the floor. Was this truly weakness? Or was it a strength her people had forgotten? She rose suddenly, pacing the floor. Her empire demanded iron, but her heart whispered of something else, something she was terrified to admit, even to herself. She touched her hand, remembering his grip during the dance. A ruler of countless worlds, shaken by the touch of one human. "This bond," she whispered into the silence. "It will either save us or destroy us all." The danger revealed itself sooner than she expected. Days later, as the human crossed one of the outer courtyards, carrying gifts the princess had requested, an arrow hissed through the air. He turned just in time. The shaft struck the wall beside him, splintering stone. Guards rushed forward, shouting. Shadows scattered into the night. The human froze, his heart pounding, but his steps did not falter. He knew now he was not simply a servant. He was a target. When the Empress heard, her fury shook the palace. She summoned the generals, her voice like thunder. "Find who dares this. and bring me their heads." But even as her words echoed, she knew the truth. It was not just assassins in the dark. It was her own lords, her own council. The rebellion had begun, and at the center of it all was not a foreign army, not a rival empire. It was one human who had danced, and in doing so had broken the silence of an empire. That night, the Empress stood once again on her balcony, the stars endless above her. She clenched the railing, her eyes blazing. "He is mine to protect," she whispered to the cold night, "even if it costs me everything." And in the shadows below, unseen, the assassins whispered their reply, "Then she will fall with him." The empire was breaking. Whispers had become open defiance. Nobles who once bowed now questioned. Soldiers who once obeyed now muttered. And through it all, one truth echoed in every corner of the galaxy. The Empress danced with a human dot, the rebellion no longer hid in shadows. It gathered in fleets, in secret armies, in the hearts of those who had waited years for a chance to strike. At the center of the storm stood the Empress caught between her crown, her people, and the one man who had already changed her life. The night of the grand banquet came again. It was meant to be a display of control, a reminder of her power. But the Empress knew it was more than that. It would decide the empire's future. The great hall blazed with firelight. Nobles lined the edges, soldiers stood in gleaming armor, and the princess waited in her hover chair. The musicians tuned their instruments, though their hands shook with fear. Everyone knew tonight would not end in peace. The human stood among the servants, his eyes scanning the room carefully. He could feel it, the tension, the hate, the danger. That waited just beyond the music dot, and then, the moment came. The Empress rose from her throne. Her crown glimmered, her cloak flowed like midnight. She lifted her hand. "Music," she commanded. The sound filled the hall low, haunting, heavy with suspense. Every noble leaned forward, waiting to see if she would repeat the madness of before. The Empress stepped down from her throne. Her boots echoed across the floor. She did not stop until she reached him. The human bowed low, whispering, "Empress." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. "Dance with me." The hall erupted into chaos. "No," one noble cried. "This is betrayal," shouted another. "She has lost her mind." Swords were drawn, voices roared. But the Empress lifted her hand and silence fell like a hammer. Her eyes met the humans. And without another word, they began. The dance was slow, deliberate, filled with tension. Each step echoed like a challenge, each turn like defiance. The nobles watched in horror, the soldiers in disbelief. But then something unexpected. Princess laughed. A bright, ringing laugh that silenced even the rebels. She clapped her hands, tears in her eyes, watching her mother and the human move together, as if the universe itself had written this moment. For the Empress, nothing else mattered. Not the throne, not the rebellion, not the crown that weighed. Like chains, only the warmth of his hand guiding hers, the rhythm that made her feel alive again. But danger moved in the crowd. From the corner of the hall, a figure raised a blade, eyes burning with hate. The assassins had struck at last. Now! The rebel leader shouted. Chaos exploded. Steel clashed, soldiers roared, nobles screamed. Assassins charged toward the human, blades flashing. The Empress spun, her cloak swirling, and with a roar she seized a guard's spear. The hall froze at the sight. An Empress, crown on her head, weapon in her hand, fighting not for her throne but for him. The assassin struck, but the human moved too swift, steady, unafraid. He blocked one blow with a serving tray, ducked. Another, his eyes never leaving hers. "Stay alive," she commanded through clenched teeth. "Only if you do," he replied. The battle raged across the hall. Soldiers who still believed in her formed a shield around the princess, while rebels fought to reach the throne. The music had stopped, yet somehow the fight itself became a rhythm steel on steel. Heartbeats pounding, steps across the blood-stained floor. At last, the rebel leader faced her. His voice was venom. "You destroyed the Empire for a human," he snarled. "No," the Empress spat back, her spear leveled. "I saved it for my daughter." They clashed. The hall shook with the force of their duel. The Empress moved with fury, every strike sharper than the last, until with one final thrust, she drove him to the ground. The rebels faltered. Their leader fallen, their courage shattered, they scattered into the shadows. Silence returned to the hall. Smoke and blood hung heavy in the air. The Empress stood tall, her chest heaving, her crown tilted but still shining. The human beside her bowed his head, his shirt torn, his hands bloodied. But alive. The nobles stared, waiting for her to speak. She raised her chin, her voice clear, unshaken. "Let it be known," she declared, "that tonight the throne stood. Not by power alone, but by life, by joy, by the bond no blade can cut." Her eyes swept the hall, daring any to defy her. None spoke. None moved. At her side, the human lowered his eyes, whispering softly so only she could hear, "This was our final dance." But the Empress, her lips barely trembling into the faintest smile, whispered back, "No, it is only the beginning." And as the nobles bowed in silence, as the princess laughed with tears on her cheeks, the Empress knew one truth: her life and her empire would never be the same again.